Here I am, friendly, approachable, maybe even a little goofy. And now, hmm, same person, but suddenly I may seem more serious, even political. That's the thing with hats. Sometimes changing one changes how people see you. The shift can be subtle or it can cause a stir. And that's exactly the kind of shift that just played out between Joe Gebbia, one of Airbnb's co founders, Airbnb.org, and a broader Airbnb brand. So, in this video, I'm going to break down what really happened, why Joe Gebbia stepped down from Airbnb.org, what that means for Airbnb's identity, and why it's relevant to you as a vacation rental manager. This is not about taking sides. You know me, not taking sides. I'm all about understanding facts, reactions, and what it all means for the platform many of us rely on. Let's get to it. Let's start with Airbnb.org. This is a non-profit organization that was launched back in 2020. Its mission is to provide temporary housing to people displaced by conflict, disasters, or humanitarian crises. It's helped people fleeing war in Ukraine, families impacted by natural disasters like hurricanes in Florida, help them find a safe place to stay, and often thanks to volunteer hosts like us. It's important to know that Airbnb.org is separate from Airbnb.com. If you're listing properties, you're using Airbnb.com, the platform we all know. But because the two share a name and a founding story, when something big happens at Airbnb.org, it can still impact how people, guests, and hosts perceive the Airbnb brand overall. Joe Gebbia co founded Airbnb in 2008, and after stepping back from day to day operations in 2022, he focused more on investments and social impact work. One of those projects was Airbnb.org, where he served as chairman for the past 6 years. But earlier this year, things started to shift. In January, he shared on social media that he had voted Republican in the 2024 election, which he described as a significant departure from his earlier views. Then, over the next few weeks, he began reposting content that questioned migration policies in the US and Europe, especially around what he called mass migration and whether the public had ever really voted for it. So, to be clear, his comments were not framed as anti refugee. They focused more on how migration policy is made and whether it reflects democratic input. But for a humanitarian nonprofit like Airbnb.org, which works closely with displaced people and governmental agencies, that kind of messaging raised some concerns. Then in February, things escalated. Joe Gebbia officially joined DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, an initiative created by President Trump and led by Elon Musk. The goal of DOGE is to reduce waste and corruption, decrease the size of government agencies, cut diversity inclusion programs, and restructure foreign aid, including aid tied to refugee support. Gebbia supported some of these efforts publicly, saying that outdated government systems needed to be modernized and that some spending was unsustainable. Again, regardless of where you personally land on this, these views created, in the eyes of many, internal and external tension. Why? Because the nonprofit's board includes people deeply involved in refugee settlement, disaster response, and racial equity. And when a chairperson takes a public stance that diverges from what the rest of the board thinks, it becomes very difficult for the organization to function cohesively. So, What happened next? Well, after several weeks of public backlash, for instance on social media, Airbnb confirmed that Joe Gebbia had stepped down from his role as chairman of Airbnb.org. They clarified that his views are his own and do not represent Airbnb or Airbnb.org. Importantly, Gebbia is still on the Airbnb corporate board and remains a significant shareholder. So he's still involved in a way, but just not in a leadership role at a nonprofit. This is part of a bigger trend. Over the past months, we've seen large brands rethink or pull back from public facing social programs. Some companies have stepped away from DEI initiatives, and others have adjusted how they talk about inclusion, often in response to political or market pressures. Airbnb, on the other hand, has mostly stayed consistent in presenting itself as a globally inclusive brand. That made the situation especially sensitive, and stepping away may have been the only way to reduce internal tension and external distraction. So, what does it all mean for you as a vacation rental manager? First, the good news: this does not affect how Airbnb works, your listings, bookings, payout tools, and guest experience. None of that changes. Airbnb, Airbnb.org is a separate arm, and this leadership change does not impact the Airbnb platform you use day to day. Second, now that this issue has been addressed, Airbnb can refocus its attention on what's ahead. The summer 2025 release is right around the corner. It's coming in May, and it's expected to bring new features and updates for hosts and guests alike. So, in a way, this chapter closes the door on some internal distractions and opens the way for product innovation and better host support. Finally, it's a reminder for companies, even mission driven ones, that companies are made up of people with different beliefs. And sometimes those beliefs create real tension. When that happens, well, I think organizations have to make decisions, whatever that may be. So, well, to wrap up, Joe Gebbia stepping down from Airbnb.org is not a crisis, it's not a scandal, but it's a good example of what happens when individual views and organizational missions no longer align, at least in the eye of many. There was no name calling the public fights, just a decision, for the sake of clarity and cohesion, that someone would step aside. For hosts, this clears the air, brings back the focus on Airbnb's platform, listings, the tools you need to grow your business. Speaking of which, with the summer 2025 release coming up in a few weeks, we'll be keeping an eye on the upcoming updates and sharing what matters most to you.